I have told this story maybe 4 times in my life, and every time my hands get a little cold when I get to the middle of it. I don't know why, it happened years ago, but some things stay wet in your memory like paint that never quite dries. Let me start where it actually started, not with the Admiral with a wrench. I was 23 years old, a third-class petty officer, and I worked the flight line at a naval air station down on the coast. The kind of place where the salt eats the metal off everything, and the heat comes up off the tarmac in those wavy lines that make the far end of the runway look like it's underwater. I'd been there about 2 years, long enough to know which chiefs to avoid before they'd had coffee, short enough that I still got the jobs nobody else wanted. That summer they were standing up a little memorial display near the main hangar. An old helicopter, gutted, repainted, getting set on a concrete pad with a plaque. It was going to be part of some ceremony. Brass coming in, families coming in, the works, and the bird they picked was a tired old thing that had been sitting in the boneyard for I don't know how long. My job, along with a couple other guys, was to get it looking presentable, not flyable. Just clean enough that it wouldn't embarrass anybody on display day. That's where I met her. Her name was Maren Voss. She wasn't Navy. She was a civilian contractor, one of those people the base hired to do the work that needed someone who actually knew what they were doing. Older than me by a good 20 years. Short, wiry gray coming into her hair at the temples, but the rest of it still dark, and she kept it pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She had hands like an old fielder's glove, cracked, brown, scarred across the knuckles, and she was quiet in a way that wasn't shy. More like she'd already said everything she needed to say a long time ago and didn't see the point in repeating herself. The first thing she ever said to me was, "You're holding that backwards." I will not pretend I wasn't. We worked that helicopter together for about 3 weeks, and I want to tell you I learned more in those 3 weeks than I had in 2 years of school and shop. She didn't lecture, she just did things, and if you were smart you watched. She could feel a bad bearing through the skin of her fingers. She'd put her palm flat against a panel and go still, and then she'd say there, and there'd be the problem. I asked her once how she did it. She shrugged and said, "You spend enough time keeping a machine alive when it doesn't want to be. You stop using your eyes and start using your hands." Keeping a machine alive when it doesn't want to be, I thought that was a strange way to put it. I filed it away. I'd understand it later. She never talked about her past, not in a secretive way, just in a closed-door way. I asked her once where she'd learned all this. She said, "Around." I asked her if she'd been in the service. She said, "A while back." That was it. She'd go quiet and pick up the next thing, and that was the end of the conversation. After a few days I stopped asking. You learn to read people on a flight line. She wasn't hiding from me. She was just done with whatever it was. The other guys, though, they talked. There was a mechanic named Tukes, older guy, had been around forever, and he didn't like her. I never got a straight reason out of him. I think it was just that she was better than him and she didn't make a thing of it, and somehow that was worse than if she'd bragged. He used to make these little comments. "The lady contractor, grandma over there." Once he said real low so she could half hear it, "But she does the books at home and they hired her to fill a quota." Maren didn't even look up. She just kept torquing a bolt, slow and even, like he wasn't worth the energy it took to turn her head. I was young and I didn't say anything. I'm not proud of that. I laughed at one of his jokes once, just once, and she heard it. She didn't say a word to me. But the next morning she handed me the harder job, the one up inside the tail boom where you bang your elbows raw, and she gave me this look. Not angry, just disappointed in a way that landed harder than angry would have. I worked that tail boom till my arms shook, and I never laughed at one of Tukes' jokes again. Okay, now the Admiral. The whole reason for the ceremony, the whole reason brass was coming in, was that the guest of honor was a man named Garrett Brandt, Rear Admiral, a SEAL. And not just any SEAL, this was a man whose name you'd actually heard if you paid any attention at all. He'd come up through the teams, done 2 or 3 things that ended up in books, and now he wore stars and ran something big enough that people got nervous when he walked into a room. He had that build that you don't get from a gym. Wide through the chest, thick through the neck, and he moved slow because he'd earned the right to make everybody else wait. Silver hair, jaw like the front of a truck. The kind of man who fills a doorway and knows it. The ceremony was partly in his honor. Something about a unit he'd served with, men who hadn't come home, the usual. The helicopter we were fixing up was supposed to be connected to all of it somehow, though nobody on the work crew really knew the details. We just knew the Admiral was coming to look at it before the big day. A walkthrough, check the progress, make sure the Navy wasn't going to embarrass itself. He came out to the hangar on a Thursday. I remember it was a Thursday because Thursdays were the worst day for heat that summer, and we were all stripped down to t-shirts, soaked through, and somebody had a fan going that just pushed the hot air around in a circle. We heard the cars before we saw anybody. 2 of them, doors. Then the entourage came around the corner of the hangar, the Admiral, a captain, a couple of aides, a public affairs woman with a clipboard, the whole little parade. Everybody straightened up, you couldn't help it. A man like that walks in, your spine remembers things your brain forgot. Maren didn't straighten up. She was up on a stand with her head inside the engine cowling, and she stayed exactly where she was, doing whatever she was doing. I think that's the first thing the Admiral noticed, the one person in the hangar who didn't react to him. He walked the length of the bird with the captain, nodding, asking questions, running his hand along the fuselage like he was checking a horse. And then he stopped near the engine and he looked up at Marin's boots sticking out from the cowling, and he said, kind of loud, kind of for the room, "And who's this we've got up here?" They letting the cleaning crew touch the bird now. A couple of the aides laughed, the polite kind of laugh you do when a man with stars makes a joke. Tukes laughed too, louder than he needed to, real pleased. Marin pulled her head out of the cowling, took her time about it, climbed down off the stand, slow, wiping her hands on a rag that was already filthier than her hands, and she looked at the Admiral with absolutely nothing on her face, not angry, not impressed, nothing. "I'm the mechanic," she said. "The mechanic," Brant repeated, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he's about to be amusing at somebody else's expense. "They've got a lot of fine young sailors on this base could do that work. No offense, ma'am, just surprised they brought in," he gestured at her, the gray hair, the small frame, outside help. "None taken," she said, and she turned around and started climbing back up the stand. That should have been it, but Brant wasn't done. "Men like that, when they've got an audience, they don't always know when to stop," he said, still smiling. "Tell me, you ever actually been near one of these when it mattered, or just on the ground with a wrench?" And here's where the air in that hangar changed. I didn't understand it yet, I just felt it. Because Marin stopped, one foot on the stand, one on the ground, and for the first time since I'd known her, something moved behind her eyes. Not anger, something further back than anger, something old. She turned around. "What did you say your name was, sir?" she asked, quiet. The captain answered for him, a little stiff. "This is Rear Admiral Brant." Marin nodded slow. "Brant," she said like she was tasting it. "Seal, you'd have been a young man back then, lieutenant maybe." The Admiral's smile cooled about 10 degrees. "I was, have we met?" And Marin Voss, 50-odd years old, gray at the temples, civilian contractor, the lady the cleaning crew joke was about, she looked Rear Admiral Garrett Brant dead in the eye and she said, "My call sign was Iron Raven. I swear to you, I have never heard a hangar go that quiet that fast. The fan kept turning, nothing else moved." And the Admiral's face, God, the Admiral's face. I didn't know what it meant yet, I didn't have the story. But I watched all the color go out of it, watched a man built like the front of a truck go pale and still, watched his hand come up halfway to his mouth and stop in the air, and I knew, the way you know during an earthquake before anybody says the word, that the ground had just shifted under all of us. "No," Brant said, almost a whisper. "No, that's not Iron Raven went down, Iron Raven was." "I went down," Marin said, "I didn't stay down." I need to back up here because at the time I had no idea what any of that meant. Iron Raven, went down, didn't stay down, to me it was just words. It was the Admiral's face that told me the words mattered. You learn more from faces than from words on a flight line and probably everywhere else. So let me tell you what I found out later, some of it from Marin in pieces over the next few weeks, some of it from an old chief who'd been around long enough to remember, and some of it from the Admiral himself, which I'll get to because that part still gets me. Marin Voss had been a pilot, not a transport pilot, not a ferry the cargo pilot. She'd flown special operations aviation, the people who fly the teams in and more importantly fly the teams out, usually at night, usually with everybody on the ground shooting at them. The kind of flying where the helicopter is supposed to be impossible to do what it's doing and the pilot does it anyway. She'd come up in an era when there weren't a lot of women doing that job, which is its own kind of hard that I won't pretend to understand. And she'd been good. Not good, the word the old chief used was unholy. He said it like a compliment and a confession at the same time. Iron Raven was her call sign. And there was one night, years before I was old enough to drive, that made the name into a story people told. A team had gone in somewhere they shouldn't have had to, and it had gone bad, the way these things go bad fast and all at once and from every direction. The team was pinned. The first bird that came for them took fire and had to peel off, damaged, smoking, barely able to keep itself in the air, let alone carry anybody. The men on the ground were running out of everything, ammunition, cover, time, and the call went out that there were no more birds. That was the message: hold what you've got. We're working on it, which is a thing you say to men you've already half decided you can't reach. Marin Voss took her helicopter in anyway. She wasn't tasked, she wasn't cleared. There's a version of this where she got chewed out for it later, and there's a version where she got a medal for it, and the truth is she got both. She flew into a valley that every instrument and every voice on the radio was telling her was a kill box, and she put that helicopter down in the middle of it with the team's tracer fire going over her rotor disc, and she sat there on the ground in the open taking hits, while wounded men got dragged aboard. The old chief told me they counted 40-some holes in the airframe afterward. One round came through the cockpit and took a piece of the instrument panel 6 inches from her hand. She got the bird up, she got it over the ridge, and then her engine, which by all rights should have already been dead, finally died, and she put that helicopter down hard on the far side of the line with everyone still alive inside it. She broke her back doing it, that's why she didn't fly anymore, that's the I went down. And the man she pulled out of that valley, one of the men on the ground, a young lieutenant, bleeding, certain he was going to die in the dirt a long way from home, that was Garrett Brandt. He never saw her face, that's the thing that takes the top of my head off every time. The men on the ground almost never see the pilot. You see a shape in the dark, a roar, a door, hands pulling you in. You see the inside of a helicopter and the floor in your own blood, you don't see who flew it. For 30 years, Garrett Brandt had owed his life to a name on a radio and nothing more. Iron Raven, a call sign, a ghost. He'd told the story at every dinner, every reunion, every time some young sailor asked him how he'd made it through, and he'd always ended it the same way, the old chief said. And I never got to thank whoever flew that bird, we were told Iron Raven didn't make it. I've carried that 30 years. And here she was, up on a stand with her head in an engine cowling, and he'd called her the cleaning crew. Now you understand the face. Back in the hangar that Thursday, the silence held, nobody knew what to do with their hands. The captain looked like he wanted to be on a different continent. The public affairs woman had stopped writing on her clipboard. Tukes, and I'll never forget this, Tukes had gone the particular gray that a man goes when he realizes he laughed at exactly the wrong moment in front of exactly the wrong people. Admiral Brandt took a step toward her, just one, and his voice when it came out didn't sound like a man with stars on his shoulders, it sounded like the young lieutenant from the valley. They told us you were killed, he said. They told the whole team we had a service. He stopped, his jaw worked. I've spent 30 years not knowing who to thank. Marin came down off the stand again, slower this time, and the thing on her face had changed. It wasn't the closed door anymore, it was something raw like a wound that scabbed over wrong and never quite healed. They told me most of you didn't make it either, she said. After, when I was in the hospital, they gave me a list, I read it about 1,000 times. She looked at him a long moment. Your name wasn't on it, I didn't know what that meant. I figured the list was wrong or I was wrong or it didn't matter because I was never getting back in a cockpit anyway. She shrugged, and it was the saddest shrug I've ever seen. So I went and learned how to keep the machines alive. Since I couldn't fly them anymore. Keeping a machine alive when it doesn't want to be, that's when I understood what she'd meant. And then Brandt did something I have never seen an admiral do, not before and not since. He came to attention. In front of a civilian contractor, a woman in an oil-stained t-shirt, the lady the joke had been about, Rear Admiral Garrett Brandt, 2 stars, a name out of the books, snapped to attention and brought his hand up in a salute so crisp it could have cut paper. And he held it. He held it longer than any regulation calls for. He held it until his hands started to shake. Iron Raven, he said, and his voice cracked clean in half on the second word, requesting permission to finally say thank you. I have to tell you what the hangar did, because the hangar did something I didn't know hangars could do. Without anybody saying a word, without an order, without a signal, every sailor in that building came to attention. Me, the 2 guys I worked with, the captain, the aides, all of us facing this small gray-haired woman, all of us up straight with our hands at our sides because it didn't feel like there was anything else a human being could do in that moment. Marin looked around at all of us. And for 1 second I thought she was going to wave it off, tell everybody to knock it off and get back to work because that was who she was. But she didn't. She straightened up, and her back, the back she'd broken in that valley, you could see it cost her something to straighten it all the way, and she brought her own hand up and returned the Admiral's salute. Permission granted, Lieutenant, she said, not Admiral, Lieutenant, took him right back to the dirt and the dark and the night she came for him. And then she added, real quiet just for him, but I was close enough to hear it. You're welcome, I'm glad the list was wrong. I would love to tell you the story ends there with the salute, everybody crying, roll the music. And in the movie version it probably does. But real life keeps going after the good part, and honestly the part that comes after is the part I think about most. Because here's what I expected to happen. I expected the Admiral to thank her big in public, get a great photo for the public affairs lady's clipboard, maybe a handshake for the cameras on ceremony day, and then climb back in his car and drive off into being an admiral again. The version where the powerful man has his nice moment with the little people and then goes back to being powerful. I'd seen that version before, we all had. That is not what Garrett Brandt did. He stayed in that hot hangar with that broken-down helicopter for the rest of the afternoon, took his jacket off, rolled up his sleeves, and he asked Marin, asked not told, if he could help with the bird. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Then she handed him a rag and pointed him at the worst, dirtiest, most tedious job there was, the same kind of job she'd handed me when I'd laughed at Tukes. And the Admiral got down on the concrete in his good uniform trousers and did it. Badly. She corrected him about a dozen times. He took it like a private. The aides didn't know what to do, the captain didn't know what to do, the car waited, and Brandt just kept working, and every now and then he'd ask her a question, not about the helicopter, about that night, what she remembered, what she saw, and she'd answer slow in pieces, and he'd nod, and sometimes he'd stop working for a second and just look at the floor. 30 years of a story with a hole in the middle of it, and the two people who could fill the hole were finally in the same room, fixing the same machine. I found out later they talked for almost 3 hours. When he finally did leave, he went over to where Tukes was standing. Tukes, who'd been trying to make himself invisible behind a tool cart for the better part of the afternoon, and the Admiral didn't yell. I almost wished he had. He just looked at him calm and said, "That woman pulled 11 men out of a valley that should have been our grave. You want to know how good a mechanic is? Find out who they used to be before life made them small in your eyes, then say your joke again." And he walked out. Tukes didn't make jokes about Marin after that. Tukes didn't make many jokes at all after that for a while. The ceremony happened 2 weeks later. Big day. Families, flags, white covers in neat rows, the helicopter up on its pad gleaming in the sun, looking better than it ever had in its working life. There were speeches. There were a lot of speeches, the kind where you stand there in the heat and try not to lock your knees. But the Admiral's speech was short, shortest of the day. He got up to the podium, this big slab of a man with 2 stars, and he looked out at all those families, and he said he wasn't going to talk about himself. He said the helicopter behind him was a memorial to men who didn't come home, and that was true, and they should remember them. And then he said there was one more thing this Navy owed, and it had gone unpaid for 30 years, and he wasn't leaving the podium until it got paid. And he asked Marin Voss to stand up. She was sitting in the back, not on the stage. She'd refused the stage. She told them she was just there to make sure the bird didn't fall off its pad, which was a lie, and everybody knew it was a lie, and they'd let her have it anyway. She did not want to stand up. I could see her not wanting to, but the Admiral just stood there at the podium and waited, the same way he'd made everybody else wait when he first walked into that hangar, except now he was using it for something else entirely. And finally, because there was nothing else a person could do, she stood. He told them the whole thing, the valley, the kill box, the 40 holes in the airframe, the round that came through the cockpit 6 inches from her hand, the broken back, the list that was wrong. He told it plain, no decoration, and his voice only went funny once at the end, the same place it had gone funny in the hangar. "I have been called a hero more times than I can count," he said, "for things I did that day, and every single time I have known the truth, which is that I am only alive to be called a hero because a pilot we were told to grieve refused to leave us in the dirt. I never knew her name, I know it now, her name is Marin Voss, her call sign is Iron Raven. And everything good I have done in 30 years of service, every man I led home, every life that came after mine, all of it is the interest on a debt she paid that night and never came back to collect." And he started to clap, just him at first, and then it spread the way it had spread in the hangar, except this time it was hundreds of people, families and sailors and old men with canes who'd served in wars before any of us were born, all of them on their feet, all of them turned toward this small gray-haired woman who fixed machines for a living, who told everyone she was only there to keep the helicopter from falling off its pad. She didn't wave it off. She'd promised herself she would, she told me later, and she couldn't. She just stood there and took it. And I watched a tear go down through the engine grease that never quite came off her face. She'd scrubbed for the ceremony, but it never all comes off, that's the job, and she let it. She didn't wipe it. She just stood there and let 3 decades catch up to her all at once. I left the Navy a few years after that. Different life now. But I kept in touch with Marin until she passed, which was a few winters back, quiet in her sleep, which is more than the valley nearly gave her and exactly what she deserved. The Admiral was at the funeral, retired by then. Older, slower, but he came and he stood at the back the way she always had, and when it was over he was the last one to leave the graveside. I watched him stand there a long time. I didn't go over. Some debts are private even when everybody knows about them. I think about that Thursday in the hangar more than is probably healthy. About how close I came to being just another guy who laughed at the joke. About how the most important person in the room was the one everybody decided didn't matter. about how she'd been keeping machines alive for years because she couldn't fly them anymore, and never once told anybody why, never once said, "Do you have any idea who I am?" Just turned the wrench and let the world be wrong about her. I learned a lot of things on that flight line: how to feel a bad bearing through my fingers, how to hold a wrench the right way around. But the thing I carry, the thing I'll carry till they put me in the ground, is the simplest one, and she never even said it out loud. She just lived it up on that stand with her head in the cowling, not bothering to straighten up for a man with stars. You never know who's under the grease. So before you laugh, find out.